Today we are going to have a session by Dr. Pamela Thomas, our bibliographic project coordinator, on the subject of subject analysis. Okay, Pam?
Okay, don't forget to start the recording.
I did.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. So Sherry and I are not like in the same building, so for those of you who are listening live and those of you listening recording, that's why sometimes it's a little like, hey. So yes, I am Dr. Pamela Thomas, and I'm going to be talking about subject analysis today. We're going to talk about how and where to find information and where to search for subject headings. These slides are posted on L2 without my notes. After the presentation, I will post the slides with the notes. Okay. Okay, so subject analysis. What is it? How does it work? What resources can be used? As those of you who are new to cataloging or have been cataloging for a long time, or you're somewhere in between, you know that subject analysis can be complicated. You need to determine what subject headings or topics match the item that you're cataloging. If your library uses Library of Congress subject headings, or LCSH, then you need to become familiar with how LCSH are formatted. LCSH do not always use the most obvious terms, so don't get frustrated if you don't find an exact match for your first or second search, or maybe even your third or fourth. There are some useful resources, such as the Library of Congress online catalog, the Library of Congress subject headings manual, classification web, as well as OCLC. Library of Congress's online catalog and LC subject headings manual are both free for anyone to use, but Classification Web and OCLC are subscription services. And just always remember that the 20% rule is still applicable, which recommends assigning headings only for topics that comprise at least 20% of the work. Later in this presentation, I'm going to show you some screenshots of the Library of Congress online catalog, Library of Congress subject headings manual, classification web, and OCLC. Since I don't know what resources you typically use, these were the ones that I chose. I'm not telling you that one is better than the other. Maybe you use some resources that I'm not showing, and that's perfectly fine. There's not only one place where you can look up subject headings. Okay? All right, so this is going to be the first book that we have to catalog. It's called The Suit. So when you get this book to catalog, you need to start thinking about what subject headings you want to start searching for. So we're going to look for some valid Library of Congress subject headings. And this record can be found in WorldCat. That's where I stole the screenshot from. So what is the suit about? This is information that was taken from the jacket. So this is basically a summary note, and it gives us some information about our book so that we can begin searching for specific subject headings. It looks like we have suits for men and women and some historical information. So what other information do we have about this book? I realize that this marked format would not be inside the book, but I'm using it as just a way to find some more information about this book that I need to catalog. So we have a subtitle, which is Form, Function, and Style. That gives us a little bit more information so that we know that the suit is discussed from several different perspectives. From the 300 field, we can tell that there are some illustrations and portraits. And then from the 505 field, we can see the chapter titles. So using all this information, we can infer that fashion, tailoring, and future styles or looks are also discussed in this book. So, and I know that you guys aren't going to sit at your desks and do this for every item you have to catalog, but for this presentation, I just came up with a chart of topics that we could possibly look. And I just started with that super broad category of clothing, and then kind of parsed it down into formal, casual, sport, and business, and then went down into even narrower topics. So as you can imagine, cataloging a book on clothing can be a little difficult to decide what subject headings are appropriate. So this diagram is just showing the broader concept of clothing to the narrower terms of suits, with clothing in parentheses, women's clothes, and work clothes. But are any of these valid Library of Congress subject headings? We know that some of these are not applicable to our book, so we're going to just focus on the topics that are. So, one of the places that I personally search is the Library of Congress online catalog, and I do a browse, and I usually do the subjects beginning with. That's just one of the many drop-down options. And then I type my search in on the right. As you can see, I have subjects beginning with, and then I have clothing. So, and then you need to click so I did browse, I did subjects beginning with, I did clothing, and then don't forget to click on the search button, okay? All right, so by doing that search, these were the search results. So you always need to look in the right column, which is where we have the faceted application of subject terminology, the LC annotated children's catalog subject headings, the Sears list, the not applicable, and the Library of Congress subject headings. So you're always looking for that Library of Congress subject heading if your library uses that as your thesaurus. We can see that they all have clothing and dress, right? Not just clothing. So we can see that there are clothing and dress that is a Library of Congress subject heading, but it says see advertising, right? So that one is kind of weird. So we're going to look at our next slide. Sorry. Okay. So clothing and dress, we just click down farther into our display. As you can see, there are 1,219 entries with clothing and dress. We also have some narrower terms, a search also under, and a note, which is actually your scope note. So that tells you here are entered works on the utilitarian aspects of clothing, including works on how to dress. Works on clothing treated as an artistic object, as well as works on clothing created for the stage, screen, or special events or entered under costume. And then this is just a brief display of the narrower terms. There were a lot more than that. As you can see, it just goes A through B. But always pay attention to your narrower terms, because sometimes those are also good subject headings for you to use. And always pay attention to the notes when you're in the LC online catalog. Okay, and notice that clothing, it says clothing and dress. So that's why we looked clothing and dress up. Okay, so there's another place that you can look for subject headings, and that's in OCLC. If you have a subscription to that, you can do that. So how do you get here? You go to, excuse me, authorities, you do search, you do LC names and subjects, and then this search box will appear. There are various ways to search, but we're going to look at the LCSH, and then it's got, if you notice over on the right here, it has SU colon in parentheses after it. So I typed in clothing and dress, and then you're going to click on the OK button. And then this is a screen that appears. So here are some of the valid Library of Congress subject headings found in OCLC. If you double click on any of the entries, it will take you to the authority record. And then that 150 in brackets means that it's a valid Library of Congress subject heading. So we know that we can use clothing and dress as one of our subject headings. So in that little diagram that I created, formal clothing was one of the headings. We also found under formal clothing dresses and wedding costumes, which that's not applicable to this book, but the one on the bottom is that suits clothing. And again, if you look over on the right, it says it's a Library of Congress subject heading. So we know that we can use suits clothing as one of our other subject headings possibly. Okay, so we also looked up suits clothing in OCLC. And again, you're looking for that 150. So under record 7 there, suits clothing 150. We know that that's a valid Library of Congress subject heading. All right, again, going back to that diagram that I created, one of the categories was business clothes. So in the Library of Congress online catalog, men's clothing, pants, suits clothing, women's clothing, and work clothes are all valid Library of Congress subject headings. However, other topics that might relate are men's clothing, men's furnishing goods, which is an odd term, but the narrower term is shirts, men's, so that might be appropriate. We also have pants, and then again we have our suits clothing, which is in parentheses. And yeah, that also applies to formal clothes, but it also relates to business clothes. And then we also have women's clothing. There are numerous narrow terms for this Library of Congress subject heading, and we have work clothes. So there's also a Library of Congress subject heading of uniforms, which might be relevant. We could use men's clothing, shirts, men's, pants, women's clothing, and work clothes as subject headings for our book. So depending on what your topic is, you may want to explore further subject headings. Sometimes it can be more difficult deciding when to stop looking for subject headings and determining that you have enough for your bibliographic record. However, remember that 20% rule where 20% of the contents of the work must pertain to the subject heading. So let's see what the cataloger did with this book as far as subject headings goes. Okay. So these are the subject headings that the cataloger chose. So they chose the suits clothing with the subdivision pictorial works. They did suits clothing, they did men's clothing, they did suits clothing history, they did men's clothing history, and they did fashion. Notice that women's clothing was not included, even though women were mentioned in the summary on the back of the book. The suit has also been used to disrupt concepts of gender and conformity, adopted and subverted by women, artists, musicians, and social revolutionaries through the decades. So we're just going to have to assume that 20% of that content did not discuss women's clothing, and that's why they did not include it. Okay. So we're going to move on to the subject heading manual. And this is a screenshot of H 1935, which shows us that pictorial works is a valid subdivision, because sometimes you need to double check your subject headings and make sure that they are valid. Okay, and then this is the subject heading manual for pictorial works, and they give you that example of costume history pictorial works. So you can check that out in H 1935. And remember, the subject heading manual is free for anyone to use. All right, and then the subject heading manual for history, it's a free-floating subdivision. And this can be used under our subject heading of suit clothing and men's clothing. So we're just verifying that those are valid. Okay. All right, so that one's good. So we're going to move on to our next book that we need to catalog. So this one's called A Lakeside Companion. And we need to start thinking about the search terms that we need to use. So we've got a summary note, which lets us know that the book covers the topics of lakes in relation to physical, biological, and chemical perspectives. And we got a little bit more information. So we know the book has illustrations. We know it's a nonfiction book. We don't have a subtitle, but we do have a table of contents. So we can use all of that information to kind of come up with some topics. So here are some topics that I came up with from the summary note and the table of contents. So that can get us started on our search. So for this example, we're going to look at Classification Web, the LC Online Catalog, and OCLC. Okay, so this is from Classification Web, and I did a search for lakes because that seemed to be a good topic to start with. Notice, and lakes is in bold, so we know it's valid, but notice after lakes you have may, S-U-B-D, G-E-O-G. That means that it may be subdivided geographically. So if you had a book on lakes of Illinois, then you can add that subfield Z Illinois after lakes. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. And realize that you can only add geographical subject headings after terms that have this phrase. So if they don't have that phrase, then do not add a geographic subdivision. And also notice in classification web, because they're super nice, they give you Library of Congress classification numbers provided for some of the topics such as hydrology, natural history, and water supply, if you use LC classification. And there's a UF in front of locks. That means used for, and so you can't use locks as a subject heading. Instead, you have to use lakes. And then there's only one broader term, bodies of water. And then there are numerous narrow terms. So all BT and NT, broader terms and narrow terms, are valid subject headings, and those could be used if they were applicable to the item that you are cataloging. Okay, so we're going to look again at the Library of Congress online catalog. So I searched for lakes. Notice that there are only narrower terms listed here. There aren't any used for or broader terms or narrower terms like classification web showed you. But again, you might be able to use some of these narrower terms for your item if they're applicable. Okay, so again, I did a search in OCLC for lakes, and if you look down there at the 1374, it shows lakes with a 150, so we know it's a valid one. But at the top of the screen there under 1361, we see that lake ecology has a 150. So if you think back to the other screens, we know that lakes and lake ecology were valid in all three, so those might be the best subject headings for this book. However, in our search in the LC online catalog, we did not see an NT for lake ecology. But if you look at the example above, you will see that lake ecology has a 150, so we can verify that it is valid. However, we're going to go back to our Library of Congress search, and we see lake ecology, and then it also has a narrower term and a C also. And then there's the screenshot from classification web for lake ecology. So that one's in bold, so we know that it's a valid LCSH. Okay. So let's see what the catalog did. So the catalog gave the subject headings as lakes and lake ecology. So we're good with that. You don't have to have, 5 or more subject headings for every item that you catalog. 2 is okay. All right, so we're also going to look at the subject heading manual. So if our book had been about a specific body of water, then we would have looked at H1145.5. However, ours wasn't about a specific body of water, so we don't have to look anymore in the subject heading manual for this item. Okay, so this is our last book that we're going to catalog. It's called Conversations with Trees, and this is a screenshot from Amazon. So we have this pretty little cover with a tree on it. Okay, so our book has a subtitle. It's an intimate ecology. The table of contents is at the top of the screen, starting with preface and ending with notes. And then the description of the book is from a pioneering thinker to the end there, ecological sanity. So that part's from Amazon. Again, we're looking for terms that we can use for our subject headings. So from this, came up with a list of topics from the table of contents and the keywords. So that's going to give us our starting point so we can start looking for some subject headings, okay? So we're going to look in classification web. So we're just starting with a really broad term of trees. So notice that trees may be subdivided geographically, and there are LC classification numbers for manners and customs, botany, and silviculture, which is the growing and cultivation of trees. There's also a UF, a use for a reference from dendrology, the scientific study of trees. And then we've got broader terms of nursery stock and woody plants. We have related terms, the RTs. Our arboriculture, forest and forestry, and timber. And then the essay, which is the see also reference, directs you to look for classes, orders, species, etc. of trees, for example, elm, pine, spruce. And then there are numerous narrow terms which are not all displayed. All right, so now we're going to go back to our Library of Congress online catalog, and we're going to do another search for trees there. So they actually direct you to search also under classes, orders, species, etc., such as elm, pine, and spruce, just like the class web did. So again, there are a lot of narrower terms. They're not all displayed here. And there are 3 see also references for arboriculture, forest and forestry, and timber, just like in classification web. And that's at the bottom of the screen there. So next, we're going to go back to our OCLC, and we're going to look up trees. So this is just a partial result list. And trees seems to be a good subject heading for this work. But looking back at our search topics, there is spirituality as a topic as well. So we're going to search for spirituality. So in classification web, I looked up trees spirituality. There wasn't anything, but I did find trees with religious aspects as a subdivision. I noticed there are 2 narrow terms of sacred groves and tree worship. So now we're going back to the Library of Congress online catalog. We're looking up trees spirituality. That was not found, but again, we found the trees religious aspects. And they've got the 2 narrower terms of sacred groves and tree worship. So now we're going to go back to OCLC. So here are the search results for trees spirituality. As you can see, that is not a valid term, but again, we've got trees religious aspects. So trees and trees religious aspects seem to be appropriate subject headings for this work. So let's see what the cataloger did. Okay, so the cataloger did trees. They did trees religious aspects, and then they added that Zen Buddhism, and they did trees social aspects, and then trees Pacific states. So let's look in our subject headings manual. And for trees, you have to actually look at the pattern heading of plants and crops, H1180. So some subject headings are based on pattern headings. So corn is for individual plants, carrots, lettuce, tomatoes, etc. Pianos are for musical instruments, Buddhism is for religion, and so on. So then you can use those headings related to the pattern topic. These pattern headings provide established subdivisions that can be used for all topics that are similar. Okay. So since trees, they were not listed under types of headings covered by the pattern, I read the entire section of H1180, and they say that trees, if you see the blue arrow there, are specifically mentioned there because I like to be very concrete. So I wanted to make sure that trees really did fit under this section. And then you can also see that trees, religious aspects, Zen Buddhism there at the bottom of the screen. That is a valid subdivision based on the pattern. However, remember the multiple subdivisions are going to be going away. And then the second shot, the trees, religious aspects, Zen Buddhism is from the Library of Congress online catalog and is labeled as a valid Library of Congress subject heading. All right, so we're looking up social aspects, OCLC. I tried to find trees, social aspects in the subject headings manual and was not successful. So I went to OCLC, again, did authorities, search, LC names and subjects, subdivision headings, and search for social aspects. And if you notice in the 073 field there, it gives you the subject heading manual sections that you can look at. So H1095, H1153, H1154, and H1200. So here is H1095 from the subject heading manual on social aspects. So it's a free floating subdivision. And this actually fits with our subject heading, so we know that social aspects is okay to use as a subdivision. So we're also looking up trees in OCLC. So you can also look in, again, you're doing the authorities, the search, LC names and subject, and then trees as a LC subject heading. And this tells us that trees can be subdivided geographically. And notice that it's coded as an I in the GEO SUBD, which is direct indirect subdivision code. And I means that trees can be subdivided geographically indirect. Okay, and again, we're going back to our subject heading manual. We're looking at geographic regions. So we needed to verify whether Pacific States is a valid geographical subdivision. So the information at the top of the slide was found in the subject heading manual H0760. And then at the bottom of your screen where it has Pacific States, that was found in the Library of Congress classification web. So we know that we can use Pacific States as a subdivision. Because I like to double check and make sure that things are okay. And you can also verify that Pacific States is a valid Library of Congress subject heading and subdivision by searching in OCLC under search, LC names and subjects, geographic names, GG, : and we see that Pacific States is in the 151. Okay, so some of the resources that I used are listed there. So the online catalog, LCSH introduction, the subject heading manuals, and there's some really good subject heading modules that are interactive. And then the information about the multiple subdivisions that are going to be canceled. Okay, so on the call today are Sherry, Vince, Aaron, Ian, and Shelley. And if you have any questions about subject analysis, please put them in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and verbally ask your question. Just remember to mute yourself after your question's been answered. And once I've answered any questions about subject analysis, we can answer any questions relating to cataloging. And once this presentation is over, I'm going to post these slides with the notes on L2.
Okay, this is Sherry, and I did get a question from one of the people listening.
Yes.
And it was, it kind of came when you showed the authority record in OCLC, or the list, and you said if it's a 150, then it's a valid subject heading. Mm-hmm. So the question that this person asked was, does the 150 authority record always equal a 650 subject field? I get confused on how to equate the authority number to the subject field numbers, especially if the authority lists multiple numbers.
Yes. Yeah, it's a 150 would be a 650, and then let's look at the Pacific States. And then you see the Pacific States as a 151, so that would be a 651. Mm-hmm.
So then she went on to ask about the basically the 150s, the 600s, the 155. So she was based. So my comment is if it's in a whatever is in that 1XX of your authority record, that equates to your 6XXs and perhaps your 7XXs. So,
right. So if it was like a personal name, it would still be a 150, right?
No.
It'd be one.
If a personal name would be in a 1XX, and that would be that would equate to the 600, or if it was a
611, yeah.
Yeah, if it was a corporate, it would be a 110, and it would equate to the 610.
Okay.
And so forth and so on. What? Oh, okay. Yeah, so Edie said she wanted me to say that if you have a 180, if you have a an authority record that has a 180 or a 185, that would be a subdivision record that you would either use like somewhere in your record that would be an X, like a subfield X, whatever, or a subfield V, whatever. So, and that equates to your subject headings too.
Yeah, like this one with the Pacific States, there's a 781 that has the subfield Z Pacific States in it.
Well, that, but it's more like if you had like, well, like juvenile fiction. That's probably in a, no, that wouldn't be, well, it might be. I'd have to look at the records, but it's more what I'm saying, like correspondence. You can either use correspondence as a form subject heading, or you can use it as a, I don't know what you call that. Topical.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can. So you might see a subject heading for correspondence in a 150 or a 180, I think.
Okay.
I can look up correspondence for you really quick here, unless it doesn't go to what I'm looking for. Yeah, correspondence, if it's with the subfield V, it's a 180, it's in a 185, and that means that you can use it in your subject heading, or if it's in a 180, it's a subfield X. So depending on how you're using correspondence, you either use the V or the X, and those, when you look at the authority record, it'll tell you kind of how to use it, if that makes sense. It's probably confused everyone completely.
Nope.
Okay. So there is a question from Tracy. I find that some subjects are frustratingly limited. Is there a way to submit suggestions for a new subject headings, or a way to create a local subject heading that we can use that our patrons are able to find them in a pack search? For example, children's crafts, also types of quilts. We have around 1,000 quilt books. Quilts and quilting doesn't narrow it down enough to be useful.
Yes and yes. So if you use Library of Congress subject headings, there is a place on their website to suggest new subject headings. And then I know in Polaris we can create local subject headings as well, but I will let Sherry expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, the local subject headings would have to be approved by the Bibliographic Services Committee, and we kind of don't want to have a lot of local subject headings because it begins to get out of hand.
Yep.
And we would have to post a list so that everyone would know what they are, and it would just be difficult. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but and you can definitely ask the Library of Congress to add a subject heading. I think that's a rigorous thing to do. And
but if you have a collection of 1,000 items, then it might be worth
you might be able to do that. Yeah. And Shelley says there are quite a few LCH quilt subject headings, like Amish quilts or crib quilts. I'm not sure, if you have 1,000 quilt books, and it may be more. I don't know that much about quilts, but it may be even more specific than that. But yeah, it's kind of there's a lot of subject headings that we wish we could expand on.
Yes.
I don't know if I missed any questions. I don't think so.
And don't forget to fill out the evaluation on L2, because that's always helpful to get feedback. And also if there are further topics that you would like the CMC to cover. Because right now we are just doing online with the CMC through January, and then we might take a break. Usually we offer them August through January, but we might add a few because we've had some suggestions. And we'll have the recording to the link set out somebody does some editing on our end, if there are, just empty space or whatever at the beginning or ending of the recording.
Okay.
So we'll send that out. Okay.
There's another question. Why did LC decide to change fictitious characters from 650 to 600?
I cannot answer that. I do not know. You would have to ask the Library of Congress why they did that.
Yeah.
I think it has
go ahead, Shelley.
something to do with the fact that fictitious characters can now be authors. So they had to make it 00 so that it could go into a 100 field.
That makes sense. But it is confusing.
Yes, and especially since they're not all done that way yet.
Right.
So you basically have to look up the fictitious character to see whether it's in the subject heading thesaurus or in the personal name. It's
right.
Thesaurus isn't the right word, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Yeah. Allison Kempf, I did not know that some subdivisions are being canceled. Where do you go to find news like that? Is there a listserv?
What listserv did come through listserv? But it's also on the Library of Congress website. And I've got a link on that, my resource.
Yeah. I get an email from them. It might just be from Library of Congress.
Maybe. But they've got a spreadsheet with...
Edie says it's on the OCLC CAT list.
Thank you, Edie. Yep.
Oh, plus the Library of Congress. Okay.
Okay.
So it's just those...
the multiples.
Subdivisions by multiples, that are being taken away.
But maybe not. I mean, they're creating... right?
I think they're creating separate... Are they creating separate authority records for them? So actually, it should make it easier, I think.
I hope so.
Yeah.
But they do cancel subject headings too. So.
True.
Yes.
And change them and
update.
Yeah, like the best one was that I can think of is they changed cookery to cooking.
Cooking.
Yeah.
Well, cookery was kind of awkward.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, are there any other questions about subject headings? If not, then you can just ask a question about cataloging in general. Nobody has any burning questions for Thursday? It's okay.
From Amy, do you know anything about the push to make subject headings more PC?
Well, I think they've been trying to do that for the past like 10 years or more.
I think it's so difficult. And
yes.
There's the discussion a while ago, about a year, maybe 2 years ago, was on aliens, and there's
illegal aliens. They're
illegal aliens are still
discussing it.
Discussing that.
They have not come up with the new term. So yeah, it's because I think it maybe just involves maybe too many people at some point.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes it's not so bad if there's just one person that has to make a decision, but that's not how it works, which is also good. But yeah, I mean, you know, even like the gendered terms, like, well, really it should be male librarians, no offense to any of the men listing, just because it's the majority of librarians have always been women. But I was thinking there's just a lot of, you know, like women astronauts, or astronauts. Those are like your two choices, unless if they've created a male astronauts or whatever. But yeah, so I think they're always trying to, yep, like women doctors or women lawyer. Yep.
Okay, from Barbara Dories, we strip out the fast headings, subject headings from our bib records. I don't know how much of them. Is there a reason this is a bad idea?
We strip them out too.
Yeah, Shelley, do you want to answer that?
Like, would there be a good reason to keep them in, Shelley?
Um, well, I'm not really sure I can answer that one off the top of my head.
Well, because they're OCLC subject headings, and they're just
The
usually
faceted,
simpler terms, right?
Not
right? Kind of
necessarily.
breaking them
Yeah.
down into pieces instead of,
Like subdivisions. So they're just like a topic rather than a string.
right. So, I mean, eventually this may help more like with
The
bib
link data.
frame and the, all the things that are changing, but I bet Edie would be able to answer this better. I'm not sure.
Hi,
Okay.
this is Edie. Whether you keep them or strip them out really has to do with your system.
Mm.
And in our case, we strip them out because of the way our pack displays. It causes a duplicate display in our pack in the subject areas because we can't suppress just the fast headings. So, you know, it's not good or bad either way, whether you keep them or don't keep them. Like Shelley said, eventually they're supposed to help with, you know, when link data is implemented, and that depends on what ILS you're using. So it's, you know, some libraries do use them. I've read things on listservs that there are libraries that use them and find them very useful for searching.
Yes.
So it's really kind of an individual organizational thing.
This is Vince. Some libraries in the Rails area do leave the fast headings in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just Rhonda from RSA said that they do leave them in.
Okay.
Okay, so we have another question from Donna Shaw. I had to do several original kit records. I looked up different examples to pattern my new record on. Some had the description in great detail in the 300 field, and other records had the description in great detail in the 505 field. As a content note, is there a correct field to describe the kit? Aren't we doing kits next?
Yes, that's going to be our presentation in November.
Yes, that's what I thought. Do you mind waiting until the presentation, Donna? So she says she doesn't mind. So
Okay.
I think, you know, I don't want to jump on the toes of the people that are doing the presentation. So we'll just wait till next month, which is a great segue into what our one is next month. It's about cataloging kits. Yeah. And that will be presented by Aaron Rose and Ian Anderson. And then C. Drillinger said, we keep the fast headings, but we strip out other types of subject headings.
Oh, okay.
So like, I'm assuming you mean like the family, the FSH ones and some of the MIGs and things like that. And Sears, she says Sears mostly.
Okay.
From Paul R. What are effective ways to determine if a subject is at least 20% of your work? Ooh, that's a good question.
Well, if you have a lovely like index or table of contents, you know, you can kind of use that to, because nobody is going to sit there and read the entire book. And even if you do, you know, if it's a 100-page book, 20% is what? Do the math for me, people.
Would be 20 pages? 20?
Would
No,
it? Does that
I
seem
don't know.
right?
My math is not, I'm a 20 pages. That's what someone else
Yes.
said.
Okay,
Yes.
20
Okay.
pages.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you would want that topic to be discussed in at least 20 pages of a 100-page book. So I think the library police are not going to come after you if maybe that topic was only on 15 pages. So it's more of just a guideline. But I know I've done research in the past, and if I found a book that I thought was really good for my topic, right? And say I had to interlibrary loan it and I get it, and then say there's like 1 or 2 pages that they discuss that topic on, I would be rather frustrated by that. So I think that's the whole purpose of, you know, using subject headings for just the main content of an item, if that makes sense.
I think the hardest one is when it's self-published books, and sometimes they'll give you a little blurb on the self-published book in the back, and they really do talk about the blurb may say something, but really that's like a minute part of the of the book.
Yes.
So it is very difficult, but you're not going to read the whole book, so you have to do the best you can with the tools that you have within the book, whether it be the index or the blurb on the back, or sometimes I do thumb through the book and
Me too.
yeah, and a lot of times I'll also look on Amazon or some other places just to see if you sometimes you can go on the author's website and maybe get an idea more, but yeah, it's difficult.
It is.
Donna Shaw, subject headings for video games are also challenging. Any suggestions? They're fairly limited.
Yeah, I've never cataloged a video game. Do they usually have like description like on the back? I mean, do they come like in like a DVD kind of case?
They do. It's just kind of limited.
Can you find information on the internet about some of them maybe? You know, like what the content is and that sort of thing. Okay.
Yes, there's a case, but they have very limited
description.
Yeah.
I know that there's an OLAC document about cataloging video games, so maybe look at that.
Yes, Allison Camp said the OLAC genre terms are great if you know already what the video game is about.
Okay.
Tracy Purcell, you could try a website like GameStop. They might also provide age groups and genre of games also.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, that is, yeah, I forget about that website.
Because you don't have young boys who like to play games. Yes, GameStop. Sorry.
GameStop is great for video game information.
Okay. So maybe try that, Donna. All right, Allison Amazon has a summary blurbs. Yeah. I mean, and I also like to use Amazon for books because sometimes you can look inside the book. So that can be really helpful as well. If you're doing presentations on imaginary items that you have to catalog. I mean, I know if you've got the item in hand, you don't need to use that, but. Okay, any other questions about subject analysis or any cataloging related questions? Okay, well, if nobody has any other questions, thank you for attending. Again, I'll send the link to the recording out once our IT person has done whatever he has to do and sends me the link back. And again, we're going to be doing cataloging kits next month. So hopefully you can log in and listen to that. And thank all of you for attending. I hope you learned something new today. And I'll post the